I need you to stop, right now, whatever you are doing, because what I am about to tell you is the kind of story that only happens once in a generation of royal watching, and when it happens, it changes everything. King Charles, the man who spent decades defending Camilla, the man who chose her over the monarchy's approval, the man who watched the entire country hate her for years and stood by her anyway, the man who fought to make her queen, not queen consort in name only, but queen, fully, permanently, a title she had spent 30 years of public humiliation earning. That man picked up a pen, looked at a document, and signed Camilla's title away. Gone. Done. Permanent. No restoration clause. No temporary leave. No path back. And somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, Camilla read those words, slowly sat down, and the woman who had survived more public hatred than almost any royal in modern history, quietly removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table next to the document her husband had just signed. That is the image that nobody inside that palace will ever forget. Welcome back to the Marquee Report. I'm your host, and today we are breaking down one of the most jaw-dropping, most emotionally devastating, most historically significant royal stories in living memory. Because this is not just about a title, this is about a marriage pushed to its absolute breaking point. A king forced to choose between the woman he loves and the crown he swore to protect. A future king who helped shape a decision that will define his reign before it even begins. And a woman who survived everything, only to face this. Every single layer of this story is extraordinary, and we are getting into all of it right now. Let's start with the scene inside the palace, because the way this announcement unfolded tells you everything about how serious this moment truly was. Senior royals had been summoned. William arrived beside Catherine after an urgent call. Anne entered alone, exchanging one carefully guarded look with her nephew that said more than any words could. And Camilla waited nearby, separated from Charles by a single closed door, with no idea that the document being prepared on the other side of that door would end the most important chapter of her public life. Inside his office, Charles sat with two senior advisors and read the final paragraph of the formal royal declaration twice. The document was precise and unforgiving. Camilla would cease using the title of queen. She would withdraw from duties tied to the sovereign's constitutional role, and she would return publicly to the style of Duchess of Cornwall, the title she had held before anyone believed she would ever become queen at all. Charles asked whether any path remained that could protect the crown without destroying his marriage. Neither advisor offered comfort, because the answer was no. There was no middle ground left. The crown's authority and Camilla's growing challenge to it had become incompatible, and a king cannot allow an incompatibility like that to fester indefinitely. He lowered his hand and signed. When the private secretary entered to deliver the declaration, Camilla did not move. She accepted it standing, read the opening lines, and slowly sat down. Her face hardened at the final paragraph, because there was no reference to illness, no temporary leave, no future restoration. This was permanent. And she understood, in that single moment, that the life she had fought her entire adult life to secure had ended with her husband's signature. To understand how a king strips his own wife of the title he spent decades fighting to give her, you have to understand what happened inside St. George's Hall after the Commonwealth ceremony. Because this crisis did not begin with a leaked letter or a hostile newspaper headline. It began with one confrontation that transformed private tension into a full-scale royal emergency. For months, before that night, Camilla had been watching something that deeply unsettled her. Major household decisions were moving around her. William and Catherine were being consulted first, briefed earlier, trusted with responsibilities that once would have passed through her office. She saw the pattern clearly. and she believed it was a quiet campaign to make her irrelevant while Charles was still on the throne. The Commonwealth ceremony pushed that fear into fury. During a sequence of diplomatic greetings, palace officials repeatedly turned to Catherine for direction. She handled the reception with calm authority, and the praise from senior staff that followed only sharpened Camilla's resentment. She carried that anger into the private briefing inside St. George's Hall. Charles expected a routine review. William expected standard assignments. Instead, Camilla demanded final approval over all future Commonwealth hosting duties. Charles refused, explained that William needed to begin assuming greater responsibility. She did not accept it. With the prince seated directly across from her, Camilla accused William of creating a shadow court, a rival center of influence operating beside the reigning monarch. She told Charles that his heir was weakening his authority before the reign had even ended. And then she pushed a folder across the table. Inside, written instructions demanding formal control over the Wales household ceremonial role. William remained completely still, his silence carrying its own warning. Charles ordered her to withdraw the demand. She shut the folder, looked directly at him, and declared, with the kind of finality that fills a room completely, that she would not be treated as a temporary figure while his son prepared to replace them both. The room changed. Charles removed his glasses, placed them on the table beside the briefing papers, and dismissed everyone except Anne. Once that door closed, he admitted to his sister that Camilla had turned a household dispute into a direct challenge to succession planning. Anne urged him to act before resistance became open division. That same night, Charles instructed his private secretary to review every privilege, authority, and ceremonial function attached to his wife's title. The process had begun. But then something happened that nobody in the palace had anticipated. When Camilla discovered that Charles had ordered the review, she did not retreat. She demanded a meeting. No courtiers, no private secretaries, no family members, just the two of them, alone, with the unsigned declaration sitting on a polished table between them. Charles believed there was still room for mercy. His proposed settlement would have allowed Camilla to keep the title, while surrendering several duties, staffing powers, and areas of household control. A compromise, a way to preserve public unity while quietly removing the authority that had caused the conflict. Camilla read the proposal once and pushed it back. She told him that a title without influence would reduce her to a decoration, and that losing everything openly would be less humiliating than pretending she still mattered while being quietly sidelined. Then came the moment that broke Charles's restraint completely. He told her this was not about William's ambition, but about her refusal to respect boundaries established by the sovereign. Defending her now, he said, would mean admitting that his own command could be ignored without consequence. Camilla answered that she had defended him when the entire country treated their relationship as a national disgrace. He replied that love could not excuse a challenge to the next reign. And then he opened the folder from St. George's Hall. Inside were written instructions Camilla had attempted to send to senior household officials, ordering them to bypass the Wales team entirely and report ceremonial decisions directly to her office. He placed each page before her, explained that the documents had transformed suspicion into proof. She stared at them, and then, slowly, she removed her wedding ring. For several seconds it rested on the table beside the unsigned declaration. The gesture struck harder than anything either of them had said, harder than the accusations, harder than the tears. A wedding ring, on a table, next to a document that would end her queenship. Camilla placed it back on her finger, told him she remained his wife, but that she would never forgive being judged like a disloyal courtier, and walked out without looking back. Charles waited until the door closed. crossed out the paragraph offering compromise, and summoned his secretary with a single instruction: prepare the permanent declaration. Here is the part of this story that the palace did not want discussed openly, because the declaration carried Charles's signature. But the decision had another architect. William knew this was coming. His silence in the days leading up to the signing suggested more than awareness. It suggested he had helped shape the outcome. And when Charles gathered his inner circle for the final constitutional review, the future king's cooperation was essential. Because any settlement affecting the current reign would inevitably shape the transfer of power to the next one. A senior advisor asked directly whether the queen consort should retain influence during that future transition. William looked toward a photograph of Charles, paused, and then said, in words that were delivered calmly but landed heavily, that personal mercy could not justify institutional confusion. Anne pushed back on the room's tendency to hide behind procedure. She asked whether they were protecting the monarchy or simply punishing Camilla. Charles said nothing. William answered that punishment would mean public humiliation, while protection required a controlled and dignified withdrawal. And then Catherine's documented notes from earlier household meetings settled the argument. Because the Princess of Wales had been quietly recording incidents for months. Every time Camilla's office interfered with Wales' family arrangements, ceremonial planning, staff appointments, Catherine had written it down, not to weaponize it, but because she understood that silence was no longer protecting anyone. The records showed a pattern. The St. George's Hall confrontation was not an isolated outburst. It was the final act in something that had been building for a very long time. Charles accepted the conclusion, but imposed one condition that he would not negotiate on. Camilla would retain her private residence, her financial security, her personal protection, and her place as his wife. He would remove her from constitutional authority, but he would not permit the decision to become an act of exile. This was about the crown, not about their marriage. What followed the signing could have destroyed the royal family from the inside. Because Camilla's allies urged her to fight, her advisors told her to challenge the settlement before it became permanent. Her closest friends encouraged resistance. She ignored all of them and instead requested one private meeting with William. No Charles, no lawyers, no palace officials, just the two of them. She entered that room, believing he had engineered her downfall. He entered, knowing nothing he said could restore what she had lost. Camilla did not waste time. She asked whether he had wanted her removed from the beginning, whether every polite exchange between them over the years had hidden the same private judgment. William answered that he had accepted his father's marriage. He had never asked Charles to choose between his wife and his son, but two centers of command around the throne, he told her, would confuse staff, weaken the current reign, and leave the next one poisoned before it even began. The answer hurt, but it was not cruel, and that distinction mattered. Then William did something Camilla had not expected. He acknowledged what she had endured. He told her the family understood the years of public hostility, the relentless judgment, the support she had given Charles when his position felt most uncertain. Losing the title, he said, could not erase that sacrifice. She had expected accusation. Recognition unsettled her far more deeply. Her anger weakened, and she admitted something she had never said directly before. That fear had driven her actions. Catherine's growing prominence and William's expanding responsibility had made her feel herself disappearing. Every demand for greater authority had been an attempt to secure permanence before the next reign arrived. William replied that the constitutional chain of command could not include her beyond Charles's reign. But the family still could. He promised she would retain a private place beside the king and within family life, even though she would no longer shape official decisions. After a long silence, Camilla agreed not to challenge the declaration. She asked only one thing, that Charles never be forced to condemn her publicly. William gave his word, and a palace war that could have fractured the monarchy permanently ended in a quiet library at Clarence House, with two people finally telling each other the truth. By morning, the announcement had escaped the palace and consumed the country. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming. Newspapers rebuilt their front pages. Crowds gathered outside royal residences, searching for meaning in every movement behind the gates. Some called the decision overdue. Others called it an act of cruelty against a woman who had already paid enough. The arguments raged on every platform, in every living room, in every workplace. And then Camilla appeared beside Charles, not as queen, without the insignia that had marked her former position, walking half a step behind him. No announcement, no speech, just presence. Just a woman who had fought 30 years for a title, walking beside the man who had taken it away, choosing to stay. At the car, Charles turned, offered his hand, and waited until she was seated before joining her. That gesture restored nothing legally. It reversed no decision. But it told the country something the declaration itself could not. He had removed Camilla from the structure of queenship, without removing her from his life. And she had chosen to remain, not as a queen, but as his wife. Britain had never seen anything quite like it. A wedding ring placed on a table next to an unsigned declaration. A king who chose the crown over the woman he loved, and then chose the woman anyway, within the limits the crown allowed. A future king who made the hardest decision of his father's reign while his father was still on the throne. And a woman who survived everything, only to face the one thing she never expected. The signature of the man who had promised she would never again be treated as disposable. The lesson the House of Windsor delivered this week was one of the most painful in its long and complicated history. Love can survive the crown, but it can never be permitted to command it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Charles right to strip Camilla's title? Was William's role in this decision appropriate? And does Camilla's choice to stay beside Charles change how you see her? I want every single thought you have got. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you in the next one at the Marquee Report.